We're going to speak to Ralph Schoellhammer coming up, research political theory and international relations, coming up very shortly. We'll find out from him what is going on and how is this ever going to be stopped, because at the moment it doesn't look like the police have got the wherewithal to do it. Priti Patel, you just heard on the news there, is also now calling for the recall of Parliament, as has Nigel Farage. We'll bring you more on that as it comes. There's a Cobra meeting going on currently at the moment as well. 0344 499 1000 is the number. You can send us a voice note or call us as well. You can text us on 87222. Tweet us at talkTV. This is Morning Glory. Let's get it on. George says this. Good morning, Mike. The Prime Minister just needs to announce that he has instructed the Navy to physically stop all illegal channel crossings, taking the boats and criminals straight back to France. The protests will stop immediately. And Anne from Bognor says, are each of the arrested to be represented by a lawyer? Any legal aid involved? There's going to cost £1 or £2. Oh dear, unexpected consequences. Well, this is the thing. I mean, it's all very well saying you're going to rush through all these people through some kind of 24-hour court and it's going to work at night and they're all going to end up in prison. Well, they all need lawyers, they'll all need representation, and they will all need to be innocent until proven guilty. It's that simple, I'm afraid. According, of course, to Priti Patel, Nigel Farage is wrong to suggest there's an impression of two-tier policing. She added that she would not feel safe in some of the areas targeted by rioters over the weekend. Well, of course, a lot of people don't feel safe in Britain, in all parts of Britain, for all sorts of reasons. And that's part of the reason why they're worried about the two-tier policing. Let's talk to Ralph Schoellhammer and find out what he makes of it all. Ralph, very good morning to you.
Mike, great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, very nice to see you. Thank you for joining us. I mean, this is about as bad as it gets, really. I've read a really interesting piece in the Times today. I don't know whether you've had a chance to read it, but it's all about how we've been sort of misled for so long on the subject of, you know, multiculturalism, on the subject of, you know, ethnic conflict. It's written by a guy called Aris Roussinos, who I've never come across before, but he's written it for Unheard, and he talks about how it was the Blair Brown government that kind of changed Britain, you know, for what many people think is for the worst, when they tried to introduce, you know, a specifically multi-ethnic society, largely derived from the era's brief enthusiasm for globalisation. And over the past 2 decades, Britishness has been constructed around little more than superficial national symbolism and the desire to avoid any kind of ethnic conflict. And I think he's onto something, don't you?
No, I think he's right. Although I would say that I think outside of Westminster and Wall Street, nobody really ever had any kind of enthusiasm for a multi-ethnic and multicultural society. I mean, think about it. We had Ross Perot in the United States. We had Enoch Powell in 1968 in the UK, who warned in his famous Rivers of Blood speech. We had Jörg Haider in Austria. We had Le Pen at the Front National in France. So this idea that a multicultural, multi-ethnic society is probably not working properly has been around for more than 2 generations. It's kind of surprising and sad. I mean, if it wouldn't be so sad, I would say it's funny that so many are now all of a sudden coming around and say, ooh, it looks like as if something isn't working there. This was entirely foreseeable. And we have to be careful not to focus on the symptoms, but look at the root causes. And what I mean by this is, I also heard your previous guest, whom I have a lot of respect for, but the idea that social media and Tommy Robinson is responsible for something that was foreseeable since the 1960s, I think is once again us trying, or at least some, trying to avoid the uncomfortable conversation which need to be had. There was too much migration over the last 40 years. That is simply a fact.
Yeah. And there has been, you know, episodes of violence and episodes of crime which people perceive, rightly or wrongly, to be committed by people who have come to this country as immigrants. And, you know, whether you like it or not, I'm afraid some of the very high-profile crimes recently have come from that particular situation. There are plenty of homegrown crimes. I'm not pretending that, you know, we don't have plenty of homegrown criminals and some nasty people, but an awful lot of the sort of random attacks that have been made, which are called, you know, non-terror offences, you know, committed by people supposedly with mental health problems, you know, have upset people to the point where, you know, they don't get told the truth and they don't trust the government.
No, I think you're right. But it's not just the violence. It's not just the crime. I'm always very interested on what's going on in schools. And when you look, we have this in Austria, in Vienna in particular, where I am. But I know from kind of the data you can collect in Britain as well. When you have situations where in certain school districts, 70, 60, 80% of school children don't speak, in the case of Austria, German, in the case of the United Kingdom, English as their first language.
Yeah.
These are things that upset people, that concern them, and for good reason, because you know as well as I do that in the modern economy, knowledge, education is the key to economic success. So if we create schools that no longer can do actual educating, but are basically burdened with the concept of integrating, if they basically have to teach children to learn the language of the country, English, German, French, you name it, before actually teaching them arithmetic and, the literature, all the kind of things, science, what they actually should learn, you ruin the future of those children. And it's particularly working class areas that are affected. The rich can always send their kids to private schools. And yes, these private schools are also diverse because they will have the son of the Nigerian ambassador and the Mexican ambassador, and they're all very wealthy and very rich. But it's the poor, unskilled immigrants who send their kids to the working class schools, which means that their children don't get an education. But of course, also the quote unquote a native British population no longer gets an education, and that ruins future prospects for those people. So these concerns are real. It's not just about the crime. That's an additional element, but it's more than this. And this is what I believe the political class is entirely ignoring.
Yes, and it's also about the sort of the perception that, people who come here certainly on the small boats, the illegal migrants who get put up in hotels, significantly some of these hotels have been attacked because the narrative is that they're coming here and they're getting stuff for free. And whether you agree with that or not, a lot of people are not happy about that.
But it's not just the narrative. I mean, for free is maybe a contentious term, but we have plenty of cases, again, from Germany, from the UK, from the United States, from Austria. Welfare fraud is a real thing. And there is a perception, and I think in many ways justified, that people who not just as individuals have paid into the British system, but for generations. I mean, we think of Edmund Burke, right? Edmund Burke once said that the social contract is not just between me and the state, if you want. It's between those who are alive, those who died, and those who are yet to be born. Right? A nation is more than just the present tense. And I think the political class has forgotten that there is an idea that people who have been in Britain for generations, have paid into the system, have quote-unquote paid their fair share, that they are now being taken advantage of. And I think that perception is not entirely wrong. Right? The idea that being part of a community does not just come with rights, it comes with obligations. Paying taxes, potentially serving in the British military, upholding British values and British culture. And we can talk in greater detail what it is. But the idea that you just come to a country, have immediate access to everything it offers you, but have none of the obligations that it means to be part of that society, of that nation, that doesn't work. It feels unfair, and I think it is unfair.
It is unfair, and to be told continually by those on the left who are now in government that, you're supposed to welcome everybody to come to this country, you're supposed to want them to be here, you're supposed to be happy about it, you're supposed to be absolutely, singing to the rafters about how wonderful the country is, when all the time, this kind of underlying tension is being ignored.
You're right. And again, this is not a justification for the violence that's happening. Don't get me wrong.
No, of course not.
You nor anybody else does. But that there was a groundswell of anger going on for, let's say, about 30 years was absolutely obvious to anybody who paid any attention to it. And then if something like this absolutely horrific event would happen in Southport, if something like that takes place, this is a boiling point. But this was, it was a powder keg that was there. It just took a spark. It could have been what it was, but it would have been something else just a couple of years down the road. And by the way, the same is going on in France. The same is going on in Germany. The same is going on in Austria. It's just the British and the Irish, apparently, they just are slightly ahead of the curve. But this is a phenomenon that we have all over the West, particularly, this is important for me to say, particularly with non-Western immigration. The British are not anti-migration, but the British are against migration from cultures who are unwilling to integrate, who are unwilling to assimilate. I'm Austrian. I'm in the UK all the time. I'm on your show as a foreigner. I've never experienced any kind of hostility towards me because I know that the British people don't really perceive me as an immigrant, right? They distinguish very clearly between migrants that want to become British, that want to integrate, that want to contribute, and those who don't. And I think this is an important distinction.
Yeah, I think so. And equally interestingly, in Europe, a lot of people have come out, particularly young people, and voted for right-wing parties, whereas, we seem to be moving politically in the opposite direction, which gives those people who are feeling resentful an even more reason to be resentful because, again, we've had Keir Starmer at least twice now come out and say he's going to crack down on the protests and the thuggery, and he always says he's going to protect the Muslim communities, but he doesn't mention any other communities.
No, and I think I mean, some people called him, I think, now two-tier Keir for the kind of the two-tier policing, which is happening. I mean, let's be completely honest about this. Everybody followed this in the UK. So there was this one case, I don't want to bring it up again, where I think this one woman was basically arrested for silently praying in front of an abortion clinic. Yeah. I know Konstantin Kissin once named the numbers. I think last year about 4,000 people had a visit by the police for social media posts. And at the same time, right, you have people saying in public, Sharia will rule Britain, and you know, Islam is coming and whatnot. And apparently this goes without any consequences. Right. And this bothers people, and I cannot stress this enough. It bothers them for a good reason. And this is, as I said, not just a British problem. And this is something that we need to talk more about, because there is now a conversation to say, well, maybe we need stricter Islamophobia laws. I mean, first of all, the term Islamophobia, I think, is problematic, but let's leave that for a side. But if you not give special legal protection to Islam, I mean, at some point, you don't have official Sharia law ruling the land, but you pretty much end up in the same situation as if. So if you now say nobody can no longer talk about Islam, it cannot be, you know, ridiculed, there cannot be caricatures like it is in France. What's the difference then? So, okay, fine, it's not officially the law of the land, but basically everybody lives by it. And this is the sense that people get. The German philosopher Kurt Tucholsky in the 1930s said, the people very often don't get the legal terms right, but they feel things right. And I think this is exactly what's going on in Britain at the moment. The people have a very good sense about what's going on.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely right. Ralph, good to talk to you. Ralph Schoellhammer there, researcher, political theorist and international relations expert.